This is Between the Brackets, a MediaWiki podcast, episode 48, November 26th, 2019. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren. And my guest for this episode is Jan Höffler, an economist who runs the ReplicationWiki, a wiki that holds information about replication studies that try to reproduce the results of previous studies. And this is a very exciting episode because this is my first ever live interview. We're both here right now sitting at a coffee shop in Philadelphia. I've tried to have a live interview before a few times, but it hasn't worked out timing-wise. I wouldn't have guessed that the first time it succeeded would be with an academic who lives in Europe, but that's how it happened. I first contacted Jan to be on this podcast a few months ago, and he said that the wiki was undergoing an overhaul and he wanted to be the show only after the wiki's relaunch. Well, the relaunch is happening pretty much as we speak, and it should be done by the time this episode airs. Meanwhile, Jan is here in the US for a workshop in Washington, D.C., so we decided to meet here in Philadelphia, which is not that far from either of us. So, here we are in a coffee shop. There might be more background noise than usual, but I think it'll be worth it. Anyway, if you want to see the Replication Wiki, the URL is kind of long. It's located at replication.uni-göttingen.de, but there'll be a link to it from the podcast website, and you can also find it by just doing a web search on Replication Wiki. So Jan, good to see you, and welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So obviously you're here in Philadelphia now, but where do you usually live?
I live in France, in Ferney-Voltaire, which is a small city close to Geneva, where my wife works at the International Labour Organization.
Yeah. What kinds of research have you been involved in?
I started the Replication Wiki during my PhD, and my research is pretty much on transparency in the social sciences, especially economics. So I'm an economist. And basically that's my focus.
Yeah. So what is Replication Wiki? I explained it in general terms, but...
Well, we collect information on empirical studies in the social sciences. Empirical means using data and calculating some kind of results. As an example, a famous replication was on the relationship between growth and national debt, where a PhD student found out that an influential study had misused the data so that the results showed a different relationship than the PhD student saw, and that created a big debate. And since since there's very similar problems in all social sciences where we calculate results and produce our research with that, the wiki has now opened up. In the beginning it was just for economics, but now it's also for political sciences, for sociology, or for we even had a criminologist who said he would like to use it, or empirical law experts. And the information we collect is first we list what kind of studies in the social sciences do use data. Then if the data is available, if other people could reuse it, where it is available, also if the code is available, if there's some software code was produced that is shared, and where that is available. So is it in a journal archive or on the author's website, for example? And then if someone has already tried to replicate it, if someone has already tried to get the same results again, and if that worked or not. I mean, some people say, everything was fine. Some people have different opinions on how the data should be used. Some people even show such big errors that a study has to be retracted. That's also information we show. We show if a study has been corrected or retracted. Yeah.
And was creating the wiki part of your PhD?
Yes. I mean, I wrote my PhD basically about replication in economics, and showed with the wiki how many replications can be found, what kind of software is used most often, what kind of replications are published most often. A big problem is that there's a publication bias. It's easier to publish replications if you found a problem in a study, and that's obviously a scientific problem. It should also be published if a study is okay.
Yeah. So what made you think of using a wiki?
Mm-hmm. I worked a lot with Wikipedia, and I like very much that everyone can contribute, and the difference is made by the crowd. The little contributions of everyone together make a big product. And I thought that's very useful for replication in the sciences as well, because it's very difficult to publish replications. So lots of people do it all the time, also with their students for instruction. But usually the results are not shared. There was a website already before ours that's called the Psych File Drawer, because in psychology they have the same problem. And there was actually in psychology there was a big scandal of a professor who for years had forged his results by just making up data. And they realized they have to change something, and they produced this website which is called Psych File Drawer. And there they have a voting system which studies should be replicated. And that kind of inspired me, and I thought, okay, we should have that as well for economics. And to avoid this file drawer problem, it would be good if it's not much work to share your results and everyone can see it. So there should be a place where the results can be put together, and it shouldn't be difficult. And I thought, especially now with the semantic MediaWiki,
right,
where you have the option of forms, where you don't have to use this code, the markup language, then it's easy.
Yeah. Psych File Drawer, it's called?
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Is it still around?
Yep.
All right, I'll have a link to it.
It's kind of pushed away by another project that followed. It's the OSF, the Open Science Framework, which is also uses a wiki, but not as the main part. And since this other project has also has many options, you can store data there, things like that. That's why it's used much more. It's also kind of there's a big organization now behind it, the Open Science something.
I don't know. Yeah, Foundation or something.
Yeah, I think it's Open Science Foundation.
Yeah. Okay. Wait, so do you edit Wikipedia? Have you edited it?
Yeah.
Nice. Very good. So how popular is Replication Wiki right now? I mean, do you know any of the statistics around traffic and so forth?
We don't track anything, so we know how many people register. That is so far 263.
Yeah.
We have some bots, so altogether the users are more, but some of them are bots. And but that's only a small part. I mean, to use the wiki, you don't have to register, only to add data there. And of the viewership, we have how many times our main page has been accessed. That's 206. I think it's 265,000 times.
Oh wow!
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
And we have the number of how many times all the pages have been accessed, and that's 6.7 million. But obviously that's a lot of web crawling. Huh? For example, we have this collaboration with the Research Papers in Economics project, and they crawl our pages to get all the links we have to them and then link back to us, which helps us enormously because lots of economists are registered in that project and see then automatically every month if one of their studies has been added to the Replication Wiki, and that's how we get a lot of traffic. But since there's all this web crawling, we don't know how many people actually use our pages.
Yeah. Have you gotten write-ups in publications, or have you got any press?
Yes, we actually have a link to all the mentions in the media. At the beginning, I contacted a number of academic blogs who all reported about us immediately because it was something new, interesting. I went to lots of conferences where I got lots of attention, and we have been mentioned in the Wall Street Journal, for example, in a number of German media, like newspapers, the Handelsblatt, for example, Wirtschaftswoche, but mostly in academic papers. I mean, we have been cited like maybe 40 times by now.
Yeah, wow, cool. I want to talk about some of the actual science, which you got into a little bit, but before we get any further, your field is economics. Is economics a science? I know people call it the dismal science, but I don't know if that counts.
Yeah, I mean, we use scientific methods to understand or to try to understand economic phenomena, which are social science phenomena. I would say that it's a science, yes. Obviously, there's a lot of things in economics that we just don't know, and I think many economists are not so open about that. I mean, if you read academic papers, very often authors try to show that they have found something enormous, and if you look closely at it, they just have shown that in their data for their specific phenomenon, something has happened, and then they generalize, which I think is not scientific, but that's common practice.
Yeah, okay. So people talk a lot about the replication crisis. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, there was actually an article in the New Yorker back in maybe 2003 or so, or 2008, I'm not sure about that. There were two things. One was the big scandal that I already mentioned of Diederik Stapel, a Dutch psychologist who had forged lots of data for his studies and had very good publications for years, and had to resign after this was revealed. Actually, there was another psychologist who developed a method to find out, to detect problems in data. And with his method, he found two other psychology professors who also had to resign then because their data was problematic. And in psychology, there was a big movement then that they realized, okay, we have to replicate our studies to avoid this problem that it's much easier to publish if you have some surprising finding.
Sure.
And obviously, oftentimes these surprising findings are just the findings that came up by chance. If you do lots of studies, then sometimes by chance you find something that is surprising, but it's just chance.
Yeah.
And in psychology, this happened a lot with experiments. In economics, we also have experiments, but what is more, I mean, that the bigger part of economic publications is with data that is already there, like from the World Bank, for example, or from the National Statistics Office. And this kind of data obviously cannot be forged too easily, but still you can manipulate it in ways that, for example, you can cut out parts of the data or can clean it in a way that may be questionable, and you can use all kinds of methods that help you to get results that you may like and that may be easy to publish, but that may not be necessarily very scientific. And this can be revealed by other people trying to answer the same question and coming to different results.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned the Dutch guy. In the US, I think the best known recent scandal in science is a guy named Brian Wansink. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No.
He is or was a pretty well-known researcher, and I guess you could call it psychology of eating or of overeating. Okay. Some of his studies got a lot of press, and he wrote a bunch of books about, strategies to maximize weight loss and so forth. So, for people who don't know, including you, I did some research on him. Apparently he did a lot of shoddy science, but the interesting thing is what got people first suspicious about his research was a blog post he wrote in 2016 where he talked about how he had put together a big study in a restaurant that didn't get the results they were looking for. But because he had put so much money and effort into it, he decided to ask one of his grad students to analyze the data from the study to see if she could find anything interesting there, in quotes. So she did find some patterns unrelated to what they were originally looking for, and they ended up co-writing 5 different papers just based on that one data set. People in the data science world might just call that data mining, where you go through a data set and try to find interesting patterns there. Why is what he did considered bad?
Yeah, there's different problems. One is, if you look at data, you always find kinds of patterns. And if many people do that many times, then even on the same question, at some point you will find exactly the support for the theory that you might have looked at. But since it's just one of many cases, this is not a scientific result. So what you should do is you should build your theory before you produce the data, and then use the methods to show if you can answer the question the way that you wanted them. And there's 3 ways that people kind of go around this way that it should be. One is to forge data, obviously. Another one is to produce theories after you get the results. It's
right.
a term for that.
Well, there's something called p-hacking. I don't know if that's the word.
That's another one, but this one is hacking, hypothesizing after results are known.
Oh, okay.
So you build a theory just based on the pattern that you see, and you say, okay, this is what would explain it. And this is legitimate if you come up with something that surprises you yourself, and you can show that. But it's not real support for the hypothesis, because if you just see it afterwards, then it should still be checked if this can be reproduced.
Yeah.
Another thing is, as you were saying, p-hacking, just looking at patterns and finding places where you find something significant. Significant is a very controversial term now, and the American Statistical Association just develop new rules how this should be used, because how it's commonly misused is to interpret that if something is statistically significant, then this is shown as like kind of supported that by a 95% is a common limit. One can say that a hypothesis has been proven, and that is non-scientific. You cannot say that.
Yeah. But of course, even if something is proven, it doesn't mean it's replicable.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, 95% is not a proof.
Well,
and
right.
second, I mean, just looking afterwards is not scientific.
Yeah. Well, I know this is a MediaWiki podcast, and I do want to get back to MediaWiki stuff, but I want to ask more about this replication thing, because I'm fascinated by this whole topic, and of course it's an important topic. As you noted, psychology is where a lot of replication issues have come up. So when I looked into it, I thought about all the big psychology studies, or at least the ones I've read about in general interest publications and so forth. The ones that have turned out to be controversial because people haven't been able to replicate the results. Strangely, it seems like 3 of the most famous questionable studies all came from one university, Stanford, from one short period of time, which was the early 1970s. First was the Stanford prison experiment in 1971, which seemed to show that even mild-mannered people can be turned into thugs in a few days if you just put them in charge of a fake prison. That study seems to have been poorly conducted from what I have read. Well, in any case, the results have never been replicated. There was the Rosenhan experiment in 1973, also a Stanford professor, which seemed to show that mental hospitals would basically diagnose anyone who showed up as mentally ill. I mean, he sent a bunch of people into mental hospitals who just said they were not feeling well, and it took them weeks to convince everyone to let them leave. There's evidence that came out pretty recently, just a few weeks ago, I think, that the whole study was just made up.
Oh, I don't know.
And then in between those was the Stanford marshmallow experiment, which began in 1970, which went on for decades as they tracked the children's growth. That study was about how willpower impacts our lives. There, the issue isn't bad data, but just possibly bad conclusions from the data. It might not be as meaningful as people have claimed it to be. So anyway, that's a long-winded way to get to my question. Is I wonder if you have thoughts about any of those studies, or about Stanford University, or about psychology in general.
I mean, in general, it's you make a career by producing good studies. That's also how Diederik Stapel came into this problem. He wrote a book later on about his own fraud, and he said, well, once you have these high-ranking publications, you're kind of expected to produce more of them, and that's not easy. Huh? And sometimes maybe you were just lucky to find something in the beginning and had a good idea, but then you are expected to do that again. And if you are at a top university, you can only stay there especially the people who don't have tenure yet. Huh? They can only stay there if they produce spectacular results, and that's why there's a lot of pressure, and that's what drives some people into questionable practices. Huh?
Yeah.
And these are, some of them are quite common practices. Huh? You cannot pick on individual scientists for these problems. Huh?
Yeah.
Actually, the most one thing I want to say is there's one big difference in the studies that you mentioned, is that one is on diagnosing actual people, whereas the other ones are experiments. That's a very different thing.
Well, the experiment part was sending these people into the system. Yeah. It was 10 people or something, or supposedly 10 people. Apparently, it was not nobody, but.
I mean, I still see a difference, because one is kind of diagnosing people, diagnosing the psyche of people is difficult. I mean, you can only take what they say, because you cannot look into the brain. I mean, you can at some point, but it's not, as far as I know, it's not possible to diagnose psychological problems like that. Whereas the others are experiments that can be misdesigned, and then you can, or the results can be, can be forged. That's a different kind of problem there.
Yeah. Okay.
A very famous study that's not from psychology that has happened recently in the US was a study about how easy it is to manipulate people by telling them about personal experiences. There was a political science PhD student who claimed that he had sent people to convince voters before an election that gay rights are important, and he sent people to tell their personal stories that they are gay, and
I see.
and contacted voters, and this, as he said, changed dramatically the view of voters who were more liberal about gay rights. And this result turned out to be forged. That's kind of, I think, interesting, because it has a very direct impact on the lives of people. If that would be true, then if that was true, then you could manipulate the elections more easily.
Right.
So I think that it's important that it's not just only a scientific problem, that then it can have actual impact on people's lives.
Sure, yeah, and that's the kind of study that's going to get written up in newspapers around the world. Yeah, sure. So I mean, you mentioned this this constant pressure to produce interesting results. Can you publish a paper that has negative results, or that's just a replication? I mean, are there journals that accept those kinds of papers?
Yeah, there's a new journal that's called, I don't remember exactly. There are some journals that accept negative results, and there's kind of a movement to avoid this publication bias that this should happen more often. It depends a bit on the field how accepted that is already. In economics, it's very difficult to publish anything. I think in development economics there are kind of experiments now where the journals now say, if you show your plan before, it's called the pre-analysis plan. If you show before how you design your experiment, and this is seen as a good contribution, then they already accept it before you know the results. That may work for big experiments where you need a lot of money and you have to show your plan beforehand. For most of economics empirical studies, that doesn't really work, because you can just do your research and afterwards produce the plan, and no one knows did you do it before or afterwards. Because the data is readily available, and just calculating some stuff is not so difficult, and that doesn't take so much time. In economics, there are a couple of journals that do accept replications, but usually it is very difficult to publish a replication if you didn't find a big error in a previous study, or if you don't show a very unique or very original new idea how to analyze the data, something like that.
Do you think the incentive system needs to change, or is it enough to just have academics self-publish their studies if they can't get them into some journal? Just so there's a record of this study having been conducted. I mean, some
economists who are already famous do that from time to time. They publish kind of notes, for example, on studies where they found some problem, but you don't get any career benefits from that. To the contrary, I mean, you can even get problems in your career. There were a couple of cases where students during their PhD time replicated previous studies of famous economists, showed that there were problems, and then they had a big enemy.
Oh, I see, that kind of problems, right? Okay, sure.
And it's not recommended to go into big fights before you have tenure. So what we wanted to do is produce more results, just replicating studies and publish the results with our students. In Göttingen we worked even with bachelor students. For bachelor students it's not important to publish at a top journal, so it's just important to learn methodology. So we thought this is a way to avoid the problem. But the problem we went into is that the bachelor students also don't have such a big benefit to publish some note on some website. So even though some of them produced interesting results, most of them never wrote that up in a way that we could publish it. So this is still a problem that has to be solved.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, this will be a jump back to the wiki. As far as the technical aspects, Replication Wiki has a pretty standard setup. You mentioned semantic MediaWiki and page forms. How is all that software working out for you?
Very well. I mean, the original idea of mine was just to use a wiki. I didn't know of the semantic MediaWiki, but a student of mine came up with that, and it turned out very well. I mean, it's a very good structure, and especially the form thing helps us a lot, because I think, I mean, to make academics contribute is already difficult, and to make them use some markup language that they haven't seen before is impossible.
Right.
For most of them. I mean, the economists even use a lot of code in their, especially the people who work empirically, they are used to code, but still to use a markup language would be difficult, and with the forms it's so easy. That is good. I mean, what we have had is a couple of economists have added the results of their replications to the wiki, just to share it, and that kind of works. So I think what we still need is we need to expand the database so that more or less all empirical researches can be found easily, and I think then people become more aware, okay, this is the place where you have to put your replication results.
Yeah. So there are a few other wikis, I think all MediaWiki-based, that are also directories of scientific papers, although none of them have a replication focus. There's openresearch.org and AcaWiki, probably some others I don't know about. There's also a project in place to create a Wikimedia site on the level of Wikipedia, Wiktionary, etc., which might end up being called WikiJournal, which will also be used to publish papers. Have you heard of any of those?
I knew that Wikipedia wanted to go more into the direction of intertwine with science. I was even in contact with someone of the Wikimedia Foundation in Germany, who works in Göttingen.
Oh, wow.
And he said that Wikidata, it might be interesting to work together with the Replication Wiki.
Oh, I see.
So far that hasn't worked out.
Okay.
Of the others, I know of some foundation that's concentrating on open science and open data. There's a lot of movement in that direction at the moment.
Yeah.
But the specific websites you mentioned, I may have heard of, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay. But more in general, what's the connection between open science and replication? I mean, do you think open science points the way toward being able to more consistently replicate studies?
Yeah, I mean, open science is just more general. I mean, there's more aspects to open science than just replication. Open science, for example, a very important thing that I became aware of very much when I worked in Ecuador for a year is a lot of researchers just don't have access to science, because a lot of these journals are published behind paywalls, and if you don't have a library available that has what do you call it? Submission fee, that has paid the submission fee to the no, not the submission fee, the other fee. What's
application fee? I don't know. Some kind of fee.
Yeah, what do you call it? You pay to a library to get access to the journals.
Oh,
no, it's not an access
fee. I don't know. Yeah,
there's a term for that, I don't know.
Yeah,
but if you don't have a library available that has paid the journal, then you don't have access to the journal articles, and then you cannot read the important scientific contributions, and that's a big problem. I mean, they use a lot of Spanish literature just because they have to. They don't have access to a lot of publications in English, and that obviously makes their research worse. And not because they don't have the training. Lots of them have studied elsewhere. Not because they don't know the methods, just because they don't have access to the text. And that is a big problem. Then nowadays, especially with empirical research, it's also difficult to get access to the materials that were used. I mean, to the data, to the code, also to the descriptions, how to use them together. In economics now, the top journals, nearly all of them require authors of empirical papers to make the data they used available, if that's possible legally.
Yeah.
Also the code, but in general in the social sciences, that's still a niche phenomenon. In sociology, there are some journals that voluntarily. The authors can voluntarily submit their material there, but it's not common practice at all. And in political science, there are a number of journals that also have mandatory archives, but it's not totally a common practice. And I think that has to change so that people can replicate easily. Other aspects of open science help to replicate studies, because if you have access to the papers and then the data and then the code, then it's much easier to replicate studies. And you can also replicate a study if you don't know the study, if you cannot read it, then obviously you cannot replicate it. But if you don't have the data and the code, you can just collect your own data and write your own code and try to see if you get the same results. But then you cannot identify what exactly were the reasons if you find a different results.
Yeah. You're talking about open science from the perspective of reading, as opposed to publishing. Well, it's all connected, of course. Yeah. There's something interesting on Replication Wiki. I don't want to get too much into the details of this one feature, because I'm not the whole voting feature, because I'm not sure it's going to stay past the.
We have to kick it all after the relaunch, because we haven't found an option that.
Oh yeah, okay, right. I remember talking with you about that. I didn't know how that turned out, but it. Well, regardless of its presence on Replication Wiki, so basically there are pages that are about studies lacking replication, and there was a mechanism for people to vote on which of those studies people would most like to see replicated. And you mentioned that other site, the Psych File Drawer, which has a very similar kind of thing. So, without leaving aside the Replication Wiki, what I think is interesting about that voting feature is it seems to point to some interesting possibilities for science. We're used to thinking of scientists as working in these independent labs, not really coordinating, except for maybe at conferences and through journals and so forth. But of course, the web allows for a whole lot of other kinds of communication. I wonder if you have any thoughts about what the future of science could or should look like in 10, 20, 30 years, as far as crowdsourcing and anything else that the web can enable.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful about this open science movement. I think it's a big movement. There's a lot of people who became aware that this is a problem, that people don't have access to materials, to already the texts. And this is changing. And I hope in a couple of years this will have changed in a way that there's more open access publishing, there's more access to data. And if that happens, then there will also be more applications, for example. And what I hope especially is that the small contributions, like the one in Wikipedia, are counted more. Because at the moment you only make your career by publishing big journal articles. You don't have to necessarily publish them alone, you can publish them in teams, but still, if you don't have these big publications, then you don't make a career. And there are, like in Wikipedia, so many possibilities to make a real contribution by just adding something small. You may find a small error in a study, but this error changes the result dramatically. That is a contribution, and that should be counted.
Yeah.
And I hope that mechanisms will be found that this can be somehow counted towards the CV of a researcher. There are movements already to, for example, not to measure scientific contributions just by the impact factors of the journals where people publish, but, for example, by how they are quoted on Twitter, for example. I'm not so convinced by that, because, that runs into the problem of populism in academia. But this is the easy way where you find data.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's interesting. I guess there are two arguments to having science be more like Yelp or something, where you can review and get respect in different ways. I guess you could argue that it like democracy, it cheapens the whole system. But do you think there's room for that kind of thing, or even crowdfunding of research?
I've seen crowdfunding for research. There's a number of websites who do that.
Oh, really?
And I was even thinking about doing that for the wiki, for our wiki. At the moment, I hope that we will get a lot of funding from a big foundation. That would make things much easier, because usually these crowdfunding for research projects are limited to maybe $5,000 or something like that, and we need much more to get our wiki to to expand to the critical mass that it covers more or less all the empirical social sciences.
Yeah. Okay. Oh wait, are you talking about funding for scientists or funding for your wiki, or both?
Both. I mean, there are a number of crowdfunding for science websites. I was thinking about if we could use that for the wiki. At the moment, I hope we don't need it, but if what I plan at the moment doesn't work out, maybe it will be an option for the future.
Yeah. No, I thought, sorry, not to belabor, but I thought you meant people could use the wiki to say, oh, I want this study replicated, and I'm willing to pay, $500 toward that purpose, that kind of thing.
That would be an interesting option. I think individual scientists don't usually pay for a replication. I actually know that's also changing. There's now an agency that's called Cascade in France, and they are the first to say we certify studies depending on how easily replicable they are. And then you have to pay. Usually the scientist doesn't pay that himself, but maybe his university. And then you get a certificate, okay, this is replicable, which should help to convince others that this is good science, and also help maybe to publish it in journals.
Yeah.
So far I only know of one journal that does that like by default. It's the American Political Sciences Review. Yeah, the American Political Sciences Review replicates all empirical studies before they are published.
Yeah. Cool.
An external
That's amazing.
research institute, the Odom Research Institute, I think.
Yeah.
That's obviously costly, but I think it's a very good thing.
Yeah, sure. Wow. So back to funding of your wiki. What are you guys looking into that? I mean, are you looking for a home, I guess, for the wiki, or just money, or what?
The big problem is that there's all kinds of foundations that give money for research, but usually they fund projects for maybe 3 years. In some cases, you can get an expansion of the funding for 2 or 6 years, maybe. But the wiki only makes really sense if it's a long-term project, because I mean, every year, maybe not millions, but hundreds of thousands of studies are published, at least as working papers, and we don't need all of them, but at least the top publications should be there, and so get all of that in the wiki is costly. We at the beginning we had $200,000, and at the beginning it was the technical aspect was kind of dominant, but we calculated that to get all studies that we want in the major economics, political sciences, and sociology journals, and also some in business and finance and in empirical law, into the wiki would expand it to 50,000 studies, and that would cost us about nearly $1 million if we do that with student assistants. Now we are extremely lucky. We have a new software developer who helps us to automate a lot of this, and that would make things much cheaper, but still we need a lot of people to help us to especially identify the methodology that was used, and also some other aspects that are not easy to just get from the web.
Yeah.
In an automated way.
Cool. I think that's basically my questions. What?
Can I mention Scott and Björn somehow by name?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Because without them it would not have been possible.
Yeah, who are these people that you've that have helped you out with the wiki?
Yeah, in the beginning we had a student assistant, Jan Fahrenholz, who helped to set up the wiki, and he was just a student assistant who did his bachelor at the time, and that was incredible how much he helped us. And then there was Björn Sakula, who had the idea to use the semantic MediaWiki, and also did most of the relaunch, and he does that voluntarily at the moment. It's incredible how much he helps us.
Yeah. And
now there's the software developer that I just mentioned. It's Scott Tannican. He worked at Tableau before.
Oh, wow. I've heard of them, yeah.
And he just does that in his free time because he thinks it's good to improve science, and it's wonderful to have people like that. There was also a PhD student at the time, Brian Christoph, who at some point turned up and helped us to improve our templates. That's also very motivating for me. I mean, I've been working on this for many years, and if there were not all these people who helped, even if it's only from time to time, then I probably would have stopped at some point.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good sign. It means a lot of people believe in the mission.
Oh.
Yeah. So, what's your? Do you have a general plug or something for people considering adding to Replication Wiki? How do what do you try to tell people to motivate people to get more involved, to add their own studies or others' studies?
I think most of the people who have added so far, as I mentioned, were economists who replicated some study and thought it would be good to share the results. We have also had some social sciences sociologists who did that because we are working with the Academy of Sociology, and it's an association of German-speaking sociologists, and they promote us. And after they promoted us, a couple of sociologists turned up and said, "Okay, I also want to share my results." Actually, we haven't so far tried to get support from any more developers, which would be great. So
right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I was talking just in terms of people actually contributing to the wiki, but yeah. If any developers or other people want to help out, should they contact you?
Yeah, I mean, to contribute to the wiki, you just have to register. We have to check the names of people in some way, because we don't want to run into problems with libel. There was a website called Science Fraud that revealed a number of fraud cases. And what's kind of ironic, there was one scientist, I think from Brazil, who actually had committed fraud, and that was mentioned on that website.
I see.
And he threatened to sue the website. That's why they had to close down. So we don't want to run into problems like that. That's why we always check the names of people by their academic institutional email address. If someone doesn't have that, we ask them to give us some other proof that it's really they who set up the account, but so far we didn't have problems like that.
Yeah, okay. I should have asked this before, but all the examples you've mentioned have been from the social sciences. Is Replication Wiki also meant to handle any kind of science? Or are you really focused on social sciences or even economics specifically?
No, I think it makes more sense to focus on the social sciences, because the approaches in other sciences, like in obviously there's replication in physics or in chemistry. And we even have one chemist who... Is chemist the right word for?
Chemist, yeah.
A chemist who registered for the wiki after a researcher from Göttingen won the Nobel Prize for chemistry. I think that the methods are so different that it doesn't make sense to have that in the same wiki. Technically, obviously, it would be possible, but then we would probably have to set up a new category for chemistry for their methods, and also for the issues that they have. For example, they use laboratory material that has to be described in a very specific way.
Right.
We don't have expertise on that, so we don't focus on it. If someone was interested to introduce that there, obviously the wiki would be available for that, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it was great talking to you and seeing you here in person, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And this has been another episode of Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guest, Jan Höffler of Replication Wiki. Go check it out. It's definitely a different experience doing a live interview. I hope it wasn't too noisy. I think it turned out well, except for the occasional clang. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.